Hi, thanks, Brute. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's call. Thanks to Tamarack, we have an opportunity to speak with Michael Quinn-Patton yet again on another important topic yet again, this time evaluating for transformative change. Michael, hello again.
Hey, Mark. Good to see you.
Nice to see
Tamarack for joining us, and everyone for joining us.
Well, Michael, many people know you quite well and have, we know that I've attended multiple of these calls, but what I'm going to do is I'll just set up the call a little bit and start by introducing you, and that provides a little bit of context for why this topic, why now. So Michael, you must have heard this 35,000 times, but I'm gonna go through the points again. Michael, everyone, his formal title is founder and CEO of Utilization Focused Evaluation, which is an independent organizational development and program evaluation organization. But I refer to Michael often, or I think of Michael anyways, as a kind of a prophet, not in the religious sense, but in the sense that he sees things in the field of change and evaluation that are emerging and can help with the next iteration of our evaluation practice building. And he tries to craft that in an accessible way for many of us who feel something's important but can't really piece it together, and spends some patient time with us, helping us understand that, and then moves on to something else. And this next thing is evaluation for transformative change. Michael has a doctorate in sociology from the University of Wisconsin in Madison, spent 18 years there, including 5 years as director of the Minnesota Center for Social Research and 10 years with the Minnesota Extension Services. He has a list of developing helpful and impactful ideas in the area of evaluation, including, I think, started, Michael, with qualitative research as a foundational idea, moving on to utilization-focused evaluation, developmental evaluation, principle-focused evaluation, blue marble evaluation, and wrote a book when no one was looking, but I sure appreciated, and a lot of people have, called Facilitation in an Evaluation. So endless books and endless articles and a shelf that's groaning with awards. And I encourage anyone to go to Michael's website to take a look at some of those awards. And including time in the trenches on helping with field building in general, president of the American Evaluation Association and co-chair of the 2005 International Evaluation Conference in Toronto, which we'll speak about shortly. So he's for sure an evaluator, personifies evaluation, but he's more than that. He has 3 children, a musician, an engineer, and an evaluator, and 3 grandchildren. And when not doing evaluation, he enjoys the woods and rivers of Minnesota, where he hails from, kayaking, cross-country skiing, and snowshoeing, and including hiking in the Grand Canyon, of which he wrote about extensively. And I have his terrific book about the journey of he and his son working through the Grand Canyon. He's been a good friend to Tamarack, a long history of work in Canada, and has been very kind to me and others in our own evaluation journey. So Michael, one more time, thank you, welcome today, and thanks for coming.
Thank you, Mark.
Maybe we'll go to the next slide, Rute. We're gonna talk a little bit today about evaluation for transformation. And Michael, we're doing this kind of as an appetizer more than anything, or kind of a high level summary, because we have an opportunity with many people who signed up to go into this in a 4 workshop series course at the end of the month. And Rute will confirm there's a couple spots left. But we want to share that today in the sense that we are going to touch on some big ideas that deserve further investigation. So we won't investigate them deeply today, but truly treat them as a snack, an idea with immense possibilities, an idea that we hope you find accessible. But we're just going to touch on them, and we'll send some follow-up resources, but please sit back for a nice, tasty evaluation snack. And as we do that, Rute, if we can go to the next slide, we'll confirm that we come to this in a very particular way. And Michael, I'm going to read a couple of statements that you and I put together, and I'm going to read them in terms of where we come from around this work. And maybe you can reflect a little bit about whether we would have even have done this 10 or 15 years ago, even 5. And the statements that we think are important to share. A, so you know where we're coming from as presenters, and B, just to confirm that there is such a plethora of ideas out there, all from different perspectives and different experiences and voices, and we just admit that we're one of those. That's important because the world is changing quickly, and it needs to change even more quickly if we're going to create the sustainable, equitable, fair, and resilient world that we want. The field of evaluation is correcting and evolving a lot, and we're going to touch on some of those approaches later on in the call. And there's a lot of new, diverse, and powerful voices trying to shape the next iteration. In fact, have already shaped the next generation of evaluation. And today we're going to explore one set of ideas that contribute to this broader pattern of evolution, and one that kind of tries to at least weave some of them together to make it a coherent whole. It's really hard to stay on top of all these ideas. So what is common across them? How do we integrate them? And of course, these ideas are shaped by our own experiences in reality. We're kind of older white males raised in a Western paradigm, but we wanted to emphasize always evolving and thinking. And what we're about to share reflects that experience, but we know for sure that's not the only experience. And this isn't the only or best way to think about transformation and evaluation and change. It is one way to think about it, and we know for sure it's going to evolve. So as we go through the call, please take what you find useful, debate or ignore those that are not as helpful, point out how they could be improved, and hey, we support you on your own change-making work. So Michael, it felt good to say that. We thought we needed to say that. Maybe a quick reflection. Would we have done this 10 years ago?
We were still pretty much, I think, a decade ago in a project mentality, doing programs and projects and trying to make them effective. And that work goes on. But what's emerged and reflected and what we're going to be talking about is the importance of looking at systems change, not just doing projects and programs, of bringing values more explicitly into evaluation, not just treating it as a technical and methodological field, and the ways in which evaluation either is part of the problem or contributes to solutions, recognizing that evaluation itself has effects. Whereas a decade ago, evaluation was outside the change system. Now it's very much inside.
Yeah. And we're actually going to end on a comment on that. One that actually, I'm going to admit to you, Michael, I may even change my opinion in the next 25 minutes, but one that I just think, oh, I struggle with it. I've always struggled with it, but I'm up to the challenge of trying to change my own perspective and stance as an evaluator. Your work has helped me do that. So let's actually dive into it. Rute, if we go to the next slide. I asked you what transformation meant as a definition as we started getting ready for this call, Michael, and you asked me this question. What image comes to mind when I hear the word transformation? And I shared my own response to that. But what we're going to do now is ask everyone, and Ruchi, maybe you can give us a kind of a running commentary of what you hear. What image comes to mind when you hear the word transformation, everyone? Please describe an image. Not everyone has to. Those that are willing, please do so. Just share what you can in the chat room, and Rute, give us a sense of what you're seeing from the chat room. What
Sure.
kind of image?
So far we've gotten a couple. We're seeing clouds, butterfly, sunshine, renewal, cocoon, and butterfly. Those seem to be the themes that are coming up here. Ooh, it's coming in fast. Seeing tidal wave, flame, razzle dazzle. Wow, that's fun. Ability to make decisions, transformers, Optimus Prime, chaos, change, spring, buds to flowers. These are really running fast. Movement, energy, a circle, awesome. Horizon to horizon, rainbow. Yeah, lots of beautiful things.
Hey, Rute, in real time, we can save this and maybe as a follow-up, give a wordle or a word cloud.
Ooh, like a word cloud, yeah.
Yeah, let's do that because I really think these are powerful. And Michael, you'll notice that the image that comes to many people's mind is similar to the one that comes to your mind. Maybe Rute, we go to the next slide.
Sure.
For you, the image is the following. Michael, why this image and why this definition?
Well, there are a couple things that I'm struck by with this image. Is first, its clarity. You see the caterpillar and you see the butterfly, and there's clearly a difference. You don't have to run a statistical significance test to find out whether or not that's changed. And so the very word transformation as a sensitizing concept suggests that you can see that something's happened that's evident. And many of the examples were along those lines, even the Transformer toys that my kids grew up with. You know, you've got a car to a robot. They're different things. You can see them in that way. And so the other thing that this evokes is that this is the individual butterfly transformation, but the monarch butterflies, which this is a picture of, have the longest and most complex and least understood migration of any insects. They go some 3,000 miles from the northern climes down to winter in Mexico. And that in the last 30 years, the monarch population has declined by 80%. Habitat, pesticides, insecticides, loss of biodiversity are threatening the monarch population. And so we at the larger system level of a species level, the monarchs may well be in trouble. And that brings forth the transformation. The word itself is neither positive nor negative. They're transformations in the direction our values want us to go, but the transformation of the potential loss of the monarchs, at least from my value system, is a great loss. And finally, I'm coming to you from the North Woods of Minnesota, where I'm involved in prairie restoration for both pollinators and for monarch populations, and part of a network of people working to sustain butterfly habitat. Butterflies the monarchs can only lay their eggs on milkweed. They have a single plant that they depend upon. So they're highly specialized, even as they are magnificent in their migration capability.
Mm-hmm. And Michael, this very definition surfaces an issue that is quite troublesome to traditional evaluation with its, let's call it the ideological possession that contains most of us around measurement. How do you measure transformation? How do you know it when it happens? And you've got a diagram that you think captures that. Ruta, maybe go to the next slide. Oh, actually let's go one more. This is the slide, yeah.
Yeah. There's a famous statistician, Fred Hosteller, who in trying to explain why statistical significance was problematic, and you ought to know that last year the American Statistical Association put out an entire edition of their journal banning the term statistical significance as having become mechanistic and meaningless and actually doing harm. But what Fred Hosteller talked about was what he called interocular significance. Transformation represents interocular significance. It hits you between the eyes. As I said, if you need a statistical significance test to see if something's changed, it probably hasn't. Interocular significance says you know what it used to be. There was a caterpillar, there's now a butterfly, and things are different.
Yeah, and so Michael, that really means something to me. I grew up on the Canadian prairies in a town that was 200 kilometers from the next big city. So going to the city was a big thing for me. And it was always, you know, when you're a kid, time and space continuum is different than it is as an adult. And I knew it was a long trip, but I never knew what it meant to measure it, how long it was, until I remember someone in our pattern of friends saying, how long is it to the city? And someone said, it's about 6 beers. And I just think then I learned that was 200 kilometers. So, you know, you can do whatever ratio you like. And now I know that you would never hear that. You just would never hear that. It's a different time period. Something has been transformed. And Ruti, if you go back one slide, Michael, we're going to show a couple images of transformations that have happened recently. And do you mind just your own description of what the before and after state is, the caterpillar versus butterfly metaphor? How does it show up in some of these images for you?
Well, the beginning at the upper right, when I grew up, smoking was cool. The people on television smoked, and classrooms smoked, and we've managed over the last 30 years to have a major worldwide movement against smoking. We haven't eliminating it, but it's no longer cool. It's a different definition of the situation, and the health diagnostics. The main thing a doctor will tell people right off is don't smoke. The evidence is clear on that. The bottom right is the end of apartheid. South Africa is still working on the trajectory of being a vibrant multiracial society, but apartheid is gone. I was in Africa when that occurred, and it's been a major transformation. Mothers Against Drunk Driving, as you said, when we grew up, every comedian was a drunk on stand-up comedies. It was all about drunkenness. Drunkenness was funny, and we had to redefine it as dangerous and unacceptable. And Mothers Against Drunk Driving is a social movement. One of the movements featured in the book that Francis Wesley and Brenda Zimmerman and I did, called Getting to Maybe, was a social movement to not have 6 beers be the definition of how far things go. The gay rights and gay marriage having emerged, the social justice movement and the civil rights movement, that struggle goes on, but the slavery did end. New forms of racial oppression have emerged that are getting worked on, but these are major transitions that occur. And internationally, the status of women around the world is changing. We now have not only the United Nations human rights for everyone, but there are rights for women, rights for indigenous people, rights for children. Those are big transformations in how we think about the world. We're only, 200 years out of slavery, 100 years of women having the vote in many places. And these are major marketable, marked transformations in society. That's the level of transformation we're now talking about.
And Michael, a lot of people will be familiar with a lot of the diagrams that try to express this, but is it true that, would you argue that around social change, it's a transformation of ideas and relationships and an understanding of who we are that undercuts all of these stories? Like, is that where the transformation is? Or begins?
I think that where we're headed with this is that's a central part of it, the mental models, the values, but they're intertwined with system relationships, with what's incentivized, with what's regulated, with power dynamics, who gets to decide what is important and not important, and the intersection of multiple effects. So in each one of these examples, there's not simply an issue of health or education or well-being, of food, of politics, of voting. Each of these transformations involve all those things. And so it is the multidimensional, interconnected nature of change that's quite different than projects that aim to achieve a particular outcome. The outcomes here are interdependent, interrelated, and certainly at the base are mental models and worldviews, but by themselves, they don't make the transformation. The visible, visceral, interocular side is actually the behaviors that you can see that are different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I realized I should have asked you to respond to that after the next slide, because when we talked about these examples, I went very quiet, Michael, and I said, what are some of the characteristics of these changes? And I tried to list them, and I've only captured some of them, but I'm going to show you let's go to the list, knowing that any one of us on the call could have tried the same thing. And Michael, maybe react to the list I created, even if it means repeating some of the things you just said here. Rute, maybe we'll go to the next one. That when I looked at this, and maybe we can speak to the smudging example, Michael, I went, well, in all of these stories, there was lots of actors. Like no one could impose a transformation on their own. It was emergent. There was lots of people doing lots of things. There was no grand plan. It happens across scale. It's non-linear, meaning little things lead to big things lead to little things, right? Cumulative changes over time. Often resisted. There's resistance in all of these stories. There's changes of power in all of these stories. There's a splatter of effects. Some of them are good or bad, or some of them are mixed. It never seems to completely end, even after you have a transformation. And the tipping points always seem to be kind of clear in retrospect. You never really knew when this was going to change. Who knew when apartheid ended the way it did? But it was evident in retrospect. So before we talk a little bit about the smudging example, how close is this list? What else are we missing on this list about the nature of transformation?
Well, I think that this is a good starting point for seeing the complexity and the interdependent systemic dynamics of transformative processes. And the part of what we'll get into in the workshops is the way in which each person working in their own backyard, taking responsibility for their part of the action, connecting with other people engaged in similar values-based and principles-focused kinds of processes, cumulatively are the ways in which transformation occurs. And so what I argue is that transformation itself, like the movement from the caterpillar to the butterfly, is not hard to measure. It is interocular. You can see when it happens. The difficulty, the evaluation challenge, is measuring transformation trajectories. Mm-hmm. Are we on the pathway? What does the pathway look like? How do we know how we're doing? What are the milestones along the way? That's difficult. But once the tipping point occurred, we look back and say, oh yeah, and almost make it look inevitable. I mean, a simple metaphor, one of the common stories that you'll see of people who are breakthrough rock stars or breakthrough movie stars, and they suddenly go viral and everybody knows about them and say, wow, you just zoomed to success. And you get their backstory. They've been working for 20, 25 years and have all kinds of people who've helped them along the way. Mm-hmm. And it's a complicated story, but suddenly when their star shines, it's like it just happened overnight. Yeah. And that's not the way it happened. So transformation is that way. We look at it, we say, oh yeah, stopping smoking, that sort of appears inevitable. But people have been working on it for 30, 40 years and still are.
Yeah, Michael, so that's helpful because tipping points are clear in retrospect, but one can make contributions that have a line of sight to those kind of tipping points. And you had an experience in 2005 with the AEA CES conference just around smudging, which was not necessarily the kind of tipping point that we need, but offered a line of sight to something. Can you explain that story to the crowd?
The Canadians and Americans did begin creating an international evaluation conference, the first in Vancouver in '95, and the second in 2005 in Toronto, where we gave, by the way, the first and only International Speaking Truth to Power Award to General Romeo Dallaire for his work in trying to prevent the Rwanda genocide, which was a transformation. And turning that around through Truth and Reconciliation is still going on. But that was the first place where I encountered the land acknowledgement. And as a part of the planning committee, we wanted to do a smudge ceremony in the hotel, but it turned out at that point it violated fire regulations. It wasn't clear exactly who to do it, how long to have it go on, what the whether it should be in the opening plenary, all kinds of issues around it. And from that time and from that, that consideration, the land acknowledgements, the work on truth and reconciliation in Canada, the indigenous people's rights that the United Nations have adopted, and the Eval Indigenous group, which is one of the really strong emergent networks in evaluation, have all emerged. And in my own journey, that international conference in Toronto was the beginning of that trajectory of making that history and that a set of relationships integral to our evaluation experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Michael, I know that you've got many other moments like this, at least on that domain of change, with the apology for residential schools and workshops, etc. So that if you were to do an evaluation of that, you probably could acknowledge a whole bunch of contributions like that, each which contribute, which have a line of sight to the ultimate impact, but each in their own way are beginning to create a critical mass of changes. And
CES has been addressing that in their conferences. Two-Eyed Seeing from Elder Albert Marshall, featured as a plenary session at CES a couple of years ago. All of that continuing to accelerate the not just in Canada, but around the world. There's a United Nations Food Summit coming up, and one of the major streams of that is recognizing the indigenous land rights, indigenous agriculture, indigenous food systems, indigenous value systems, making that a major player in the world stage in a way that hasn't happened before.
Yeah. Thanks, Michael, for that metaphor and concrete example that is meaningful to so many more people nowadays. And again, something that has shifted over the last 10 or 15 years. Let's actually talk about the implications of this for change makers in evaluation. And we're going to go through this fairly quickly to give you a general feeling for what this might entail. And Ruti, we'll go to the next slide that offers, before the next slide, a confirmation that, Michael, why transformation, why now? I mean, I think it's kind of obvious by the slides. The Anthropocene says we better get busy, and the pandemic says we might have to get busy. There's opportunities to move faster than we might otherwise move. This really is the time for transformation. Can you remind us what's at stake?
Well, the notion of the Anthropocene is that geologists who set these eras, the Holocene that we've been in for the last 12,000 years and the Earth's 4 billion year history through some stages, are arguing that we've moved into a new stage in Earth's history where human beings are having more impact on the Earth than natural processes. The Earth is a dynamic system, and it has changed over time, and the geologists name eras. The Anthropocene is named for the human impact. Now, the name is controversial because it suggests that all humans have been having this impact, when in fact it's largely a limited number of Western industrialized countries that have been responsible for 80% of the threat to the future of humanity. And so there are alternative names for this, but what isn't in doubt is that the future of the sustainability of humanity on Earth is very much under threat. And the pandemic as a global phenomenon is one example of that. The people who study infectious diseases say this isn't even the big one. There are likely to be bigger issues down the pike. And one of the things that's in play is drawing lessons from the pandemic for dealing with climate change, social justice upheavals. These are transformations that we are now having to pay attention to. They're being forced upon us. The issue is how we respond.
Yeah. Someone had mentioned to me, it's a great phrase, I've forgotten who, we've now have to be the best that we've ever been. Yeah. Rute, let's maybe go to the next slide. Michael, we've set the stage here for why we have to be thinking this way. Oh, we'll go one more, perhaps, I think. Michael, you've pulled together a diagram that tries to show the relationships between several big ideas. And why don't we explain what you're thinking here, and then we're going to get into the left-hand side of it, which is a theory of transformation. But it seems pretty straightforward to us, but walk us through it.
Well, the first important notion here is moving away from the project and program language into transforming systems as the focus of evaluation, what we call in the jargon, the evaluand, the thing that's being focused on. And that moves us into then the notion of a theory of transformation, articulating what that's like. So evaluators are still involved in helping track what I've called the trajectories toward transformation that's based upon a theory of transformation. And we'll talk about what a theory of transformation is. It's different from a theory of change, so that the work of our ongoing unpeeling the onion of what this means, going deeper, is a learning process both for those involved in transformation and evaluators who are working through developmental evaluation processes to help engage around the transformation process.
Mm-hmm. So you're a distinction between a theory of change and a theory of transformation. And this idea, it looks like, Michael, you're saying that whatever we do, it's adaptive. We're going to consistently test and refine our strategy or our theory of transformation based on transformative actions and the feedbacks from that.
And resistance. I mean,
resistance.
One of the ways that you know you're beginning to have an effect is when the resistance increases. So yeah. the greater the impact, the greater the resistance is likely to be. And that's actually one of the milestones, is tracking not just whether you think of transformation as positive or negative, that you're having to track both directions, because at any given time, there are forces leading in the direction that your values take you, and there are forces leading in the opposite direction. And we see that with the issues of equity, social justice worldwide, and the rise of white nationalism and oppression worldwide. These are in tension.
Yeah, awesome. That's part of the feedback loop, the resistance, and sign of progress. Let's actually, Ruti, I'm going to ask you to go through the next slide, because we want to talk. We'll jump through the next slide. We'll go through past this one. We'll just let people see it in the PDF later. Michael, this is a weaving together of multiple elements of an integrated theory of transformation, and I recognize a lot of these points, but you put them together in an important way, and I really think there's value in that. Tell us what we're looking at here.
So the notion of a theory of transformation is that it's made up of multiple theories of change. Carol Weiss, the great pioneering evaluator, sociologist, a longtime colleague and friend, who's unfortunately no longer with us, in '95 put on the map the notion of theory of change at an anti-poverty conference, where a bunch of philanthropists were sitting around making up strategies for dealing with poverty in communities. And Carol's response was, you people ought to know the research. There is research about this. You need a theory of change that's empirically based on social science knowledge and research. And so that gave rise to the notion that projects and programs ought to be formed by a theory of change, which is usually fairly concrete, linear, and aimed at specific outcomes. A theory of transformation, because it, as you showed in the earlier slide, cuts across scales, cuts across systems, cuts across levels, is multidimensional, has nobody in charge in complex dynamic systems, is therefore made up of multiple theories of change that get integrated. And that part of what we'll do in the workshop coming up is actually invite people to bring their own theory of change or theories of change, and we'll work on how they reinforce each other. So in a quick example, on the left-hand side, the triangulated social change theory is that change at the system level comes about through a combination of education, and their education theories of change, economic incentives. There are incentive theories of change, regulation, regulatory theories of change. And when you look at things like smoking, drunk driving, the Me Too movement, sexual harassment, they involved all of those pathways, not just one of them. There was education, there were incentives, there were changed regulations. And the iceberg theory calls our attention to the fact that we often are focused in evaluation on formal, explicit actions, but 90% of what goes on in our lives are the relationships and networks that are below the surface. So we have to pay attention to both the formal and the informal. So that this framework, which we'll go to in depth in the workshop and invite people to bring their own, is to say that a theory of transformation is the quilting together the integration of multiple theories of change being engaged in by multiple organizations. And that one of my visions for evaluation is that we can help coordinate, integrate, and synthesize those theories of change toward a theory of transformation that accelerates the change that our values want us to see happen.
Michael, we'll talk about this, but it's got a very big implication for all of us who are just getting used to the idea that we need a theory of change and spend a hell of a lot of time with sticky notes and and diagrams and arrows. And there's a phrase in innovation, which is there's nothing more dangerous than a good idea when it's the only one you have. It seems to me that you're kind of implying there's nothing more dangerous or counterproductive with one theory of change if it's the only one you're working on.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've learned is that virtually all the theories of change and what we consider the things that work, trying to distinguish what works and doesn't work, is how contextual theories of change are, how much they depend upon a particular political, economic, social, cultural context. And when we're talking about transformation, we're also having to deal with the relationship between levels, the micro, the macro, between different contexts. And we're dealing them with not just local systems, but with global systems and the interconnection between global and local.
Okay, this is appropriately challenging because it does ask us to approach this work a little bit differently than we've become comfortable with doing lately, at least for me anyways. And we're going to come back to that right before the call is done. Let's actually talk about what the implications are for evaluation. So Rute, if you don't mind going to the next slide and we'll see what comes up here. Can you just maybe highlight for all of those people working on energy systems, trying to get to net zero, a carbon constrained future, can you just give us a kind of a popcorn assessment about how an integrated theory of change would tell us to work on energy transition?
Yeah, so a good example is the upcoming United Nations summit on food and food systems. And you hear that, you immediately think about growing and consuming food, which is certainly a part of it. But growing and consuming food is energy intensive. It's a conversion of energy into something that we can use for our own sustenance. It involves livelihoods, it involves communities, it involves the quality of land, air, and water. And it involves culture, politics, the economy, regulations, incentives, families, gender, equality issues, equity issues. And so the effort to deal with energy is deeply connected with climate, with food, with other kinds of systems. And the work on transforming energy systems is therefore connected with transforming these other kind of systems. And we're dealing with big, powerful, economically rich kind of traditional ways of doing fossil fuels that are having to be taken apart. It has stock market implications, it has regulatory implications, it has citizen consumer implications, what we demand, what we're able to do. All of those things are necessary to get a transformation in energy systems, and they're interconnected.
Yeah. In fact, we're going to speak about transforming food systems again in a couple of moments. But what you're really emphasizing is the integration of multiple elements, that we're beyond the time when we can work on little pieces or one dimension or one scale or one theory. And that is what's amazing to me, the implications for evaluation. So if we go to the next slide, we want to acknowledge, Michael, at least I was, when I first heard you were working on this, I go, well, my goodness, there's so much going on in the field of evaluation. Blue marble evaluation, principal focus, social justice, equitable, true cost accounting. It just, the list goes on. And in fact, you and I were involved in a course helping with Simon Fraser University, talking about social transformational learning for social transformation. So the expressions of trying to be transformative are everywhere. And you, it seems to me that you're trying, you were informed by this, your thinking's informed by this, but we're trying to answer the question of, so what now? What does that mean for the practitioner who wants to weave all of this together? So if we go to the next slide, Michael, you tell me, you said you're feeling right at this point in time that there's 6 criteria or elements for evaluation for transformation that is informed by everything that's going on, but helps us synthesize this. Is that correct? And if so, can you give us a sense of what these 6 criteria are?
I've just come out with an article in the American Journal of Evaluation, and we'll be using it again in the workshop and going into these in considerable depth. And they're meant to be suggestive, not definitive. That you know, identifying criteria is a engagement process. So they're meant to suggest how we change our thinking. The traditional criteria for evaluation are things like effectiveness, efficiency, having a logic model, having discrete measurable outcomes. Those are criteria for good evaluation. What I've suggested here is that one of the criteria is what I've called transformation fidelity. Already in a short period of time, the language of transformation is appearing all over the place. It's become a cachet. There's what's called green glossing, transformation glossing, people using the language. And part of what we've always done as evaluators around claims is to look at the reality of those claims. So the transformation fidelity question is, when claims are made that something is transformational, what's the evidence for that? What's the theory of transformation? That's reality testing is part of our responsibility. Yeah. That this requires a complex systems framing. And again, my journey on that goes back to working with Brenda Zimmerman and Francis Wesley in the Getting to Maybe book, which was about social movements and complexity. Full cost accounting is the difference between that and the traditional efficiency is that efficiency is a closed system input-output measurement, whereas full cost accounting looks at the effects of actions, not just in achieving particular outcomes, but the effects on human health, the effects on communities, the effects on culture, the effects on the environment, to take in full count the costs and benefits of initiatives, not simply a narrow closed system view. Mm-hmm. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are major values that we need to address in transformation. Adaptive sustainability, affecting the future of the planet. And finally, the interconnections among these things, that we're not dealing in isolation, but we're seeing a more interconnected, systemic, complex world. These criteria are one window into how evaluation is changing, as well as how to think about transformation, because what's happened is evaluation has moved from a back-end activity to a front-end activity, and we're now involved in helping frame initiatives by the very criteria that we suggest by which they ought to be evaluated, in part determines what gets funded, what gets undertaken. So these are not just back-end things. Did they happen? They are design elements. And that's the way the Blue Marble evaluation book around transformation is written, is to say, criteria for transformation are both design, implementation, and evaluation criteria.
Yeah. And Michael, I know you said we'll go into this in more in depth in the workshop, but we will explore the evolution of traditional evaluation criteria to this one, the evaluation equivalent of the caterpillar into another generation butterfly. So we'll spend more time on this. And if I have this correct, you're applying these criteria to some of the work you're doing on food systems.
That's right. We're doing, there are independent dialogues going on leading up to the World Global Food System Summit, which is meant to be of equivalent importance to the climate summit, and that the theme of that summit is transforming food systems. And so as we're analyzing, the Blue Marble team is analyzing what's coming out of the independent dialogues and working with the Global Alliance for the Future of Food on the principles that are guiding the summit. And so it is a worldwide opportunity to engage with people who are on a transformation trajectory around what's most basic to human beings, and that is our food and food systems.
Yeah. Wow. This is, yeah, I get excited by this. I'm so nervous about this, Michael, because it feels like, again, we've got to be the best we've ever been. And there are lots of implications of this for change makers and funders and evaluators. And we wanted to talk a little bit about that, but I'm very sensitive to the time and the fact that there's some very good questions in the box. I'm wondering if, before we sign off and talk about how people can dive into this more, that perhaps we open it up. We've got some, Rute, we talked about a snack. This was clearly a yummy snack of some big ideas. Why don't you give us a sense of what's coming up in the chat box in terms of questions? Let's just pick a few, and then Michael, you can wrestle with them, and then we'll talk about how people can jump in for more.
For sure. So the first one here I see is from Lisa, and I believe this was a reflection to one of the diagrams. So she's wondering about ripeness also being a factor, and if this would mean less resistance. So can you elaborate on this?
I think it's a great point, but my sense is that ripeness doesn't happen everywhere at the same place. So some people get ripe and some get rotten. And so if you're not able to build on the ripeness, you get a lot of rottenness going on. So these are again parallel processes, and some of the early adopters work is about the visionaries who are able to help create those conditions of ripeness. They just don't occur. In retrospect, one of the things historians often will say is that things appeared ripe. But if we look at climate change, when Jimmy Carter was president in 1976, he was the first president, in fact, the first world leader to actually try to put climate change on the agenda. He put solar reflectors on the White House. He was worried about energy consumption. And he was brought down, his presidency was brought down by spike in gas prices and long gas lines that some of you who have been around for a long time will remember. And he was disgraced, and Ronald Reagan and others came in and wiped climate change off the agenda. At that point, it appeared ripe. An inconvenient truth appeared like it was going to be ripe. Well, we now are in an emergency. So we're beyond ripeness. When you get to the emergency is when the stuff is going rotten. And if you don't do something quickly, it's going to completely deteriorate. And that's the stage we're at now, where things are looking very bad very quickly. So everybody's on board, theoretically, and in terms of language, but our job in part is to call them on walking the talk.
Yeah, terrific, great question. Thanks, Michael. Rute, another one.
Yes, so this one's from an anonymous attendee and is wondering, what was the most creative and abstract form of transformative evaluation that either of you have witnessed or assisted in?
Good one, Michael. That one's all yours.
Well, I was going to turn it back to you because Mark was present when the Berlin Wall fell. And I understand that it may not have fallen without you. He was the straw that broke the camel's back up there on top of the Berlin Wall. For me, the transformation still underway, but a huge transformation is in the areas of diversity, social justice, equity, indigenous peoples, really coming to honor multiple perspectives. And to take that into account in evaluations. It's it's increasingly the case that evaluations attend to use to multiple perspectives, and that wasn't the case. Evaluation comes out of a very authoritarian, top-down, command and control kind of ideology. And so the number of different new directions that Mark put up on a slide of how evaluation itself is being transformed into a multi-perspective, multi-stakeholder, diverse, inclusive, equitably concerned, sustainability-driven field is a major transformation that I've experienced in the last decade.
Great example.
All right.
Thank you. Ruke, another one?
Yeah. So this one's from Denise, wondering, what is the iceberg theory?
Iceberg theory is, as you know, icebergs only about 10%, I think it's actually 9.7%, is visible above the water. And so from a social movement point of view, we give a lot of attention to formal agreements, formal theories of change, our formal measurements, our formal reports. That's all the visible stuff. But what we know about how the world changes and what social movements are is that 90% below the surface are what Mark referred to earlier as the belief systems. You don't see those, the worldviews, the norms, the relationships. One of the things I found over the years, I've been at this for 50 years, and every evaluation I've ever done, I've asked people, what's the most important thing that you've taken away from this program? And often the number one thing they mention, always in the top three, are the relationships that they formed with other participants, with staff. I've never seen that be a part of a logic model. That's the below the surface stuff that is important, because we're social animals. So when we look at the world scene, we've got all of the, we've got the stock markets we can track, we've got financial flows that we can track, but in fact, the world's billionaires know each other. The people who run corporations know each other. The Davos relationships that people are having in back rooms. A lot of what makes the world go around is not visible to us ordinary folk. And that's going to be part of the transformation, is making more of that stuff visible. The contrary movement is Bitcoin, is the capacity to hide transitions in the netherworld of the internet, so that we don't know who's doing what, who owns what those resources are, who's controlling things. There's a whole counter movement against transparency to greater secrecy among the people who have wealth and power. So that's an example of the competing trends as we look at transformation.
Wow. Rute, this is so much fun, and I know we have to do some transitional things, but do you think managing the questions, we have time for one or two more?
I think we'll have time for at least one more.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, let's keep going. This is great.
All right, so we have one from Crystal, and she's saying, if we are in the early stages of growing an evaluation muscle within our organization, can we start with transformational evaluation?
I love that question. In fact, I've been doing a lot of training with new and emerging evaluators and organizations that are just getting started. And the reason I love working with those situations is that you haven't picked up all the bad habits yet. So it's actually easier to form positive habits than to overcome bad habits. And those of you who've had to redo your nutritional system or your exercise system or your relationship system know that changing habits is much harder than forming good habits from the beginning. So you can start with transformation as a way of looking at what is your organization's contribution in your own neighborhood and backyard, when you're framing whatever it is that you're doing, that you include attention to transformation in that framing, in that work, which makes you part of the worldwide transformational network. This is a crisis where we need all hands on board. Everybody's going to have to get engaged to deal with the climate and related emergencies. And so the time to start is now.
Yeah.
Right.
And in fact, Rute, we both saw this question come in. It's sort of related. Michael, Rute, do you mind if I ask this?
Go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, that people are going to talk about the normal thing, not normal, Michael, but it comes up often. How do we act transformational in a system that encourages more traditional approaches, whether it be a political system or a funding system? And there's a nice practical question here from Pamela, wondering how is it recommended to start moving from the more traditional model of to the criteria of transformative evaluation being proposed when we're working with more traditional results tools? Like, are they irreconcilable, Michael, or are they just, is it a two-ring circus that we have to manage?
Well, the answer for me is in Leonard Cohen's song Anthem, in which he has the great lyric, the cracks are where the light comes through. You look for cracks in the existing system. Every system has cracks. And so you look for allies. Those are the early adopters. You look for cracks. I urge people not to take on the resistance. Resistors are very good at resisting. They are black holes of resistance. They suck up energy. So you go around the resistors. You find allies. You find the cracks. You work there. When I began evaluation 50 years ago, evaluation was completely dominated by concerns about methodological quality. And the dominant paradigm was we produce good work, and what happens to that work is not our problem. And I've been working for 50 years to say evaluators have responsibility for use. That was considered a radical notion 50 years ago. It's now a mainstream notion. And that's because at one evaluator at a time, finding allies, working with clients, building that momentum, we each have to play our role, and that's why it's all hands on board. So look for the cracks that let the light through, follow those cracks, enlarge the cracks, build more light, find allies, and become part of the transformational network.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Michael. I'm just looking at the time, and I know we have to wrap up, so I don't want to keep people later than they need to be. But I'll just say for people who we weren't able to get to your questions, I'll reach out to Mark and Michael to see if we can get you some answers. Just some quick housekeeping things. So as stated earlier, we will send you a recording and all the details that were discussed in the call. And you can join us for the 4-part virtual workshop series with Mark and Michael to dive a little bit deeper into some of the ideas we talked about today. And you can learn how evaluation can drive transformative efforts to address complex issues like climate change, equity, and so on. Thanks so much, Mark and Michael, for joining us today. This was really insightful for me, always in the background, getting to listen to all these great ideas. And thanks to everybody for joining us today. It was really great for your questions and comments. So I'm going to let everyone go. Hopefully you have a great day.
Great. Thanks, Rute. Thanks, Michael. It was terrific. Thanks, everyone. Michael, we'll chat again in 2 weeks.
Right. Thank you. Thanks, Tamarack.